What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. In today's video we are comparing the GoPro Hero 8 Black to the GoPro Hero 7 Black, and we are trying to figure out if it's worth upgrading from the 7 to the 8 or if it's worth buying the 7 over the 8. Because these days you can actually buy the GoPro Hero 7 Black for about $329, where the GoPro 8 Black is about $399. So you'd basically save yourself $70 if you'd buy this one over this one. Now the GoPro 8 is bigger and heavier, but at least this time around we don't need to use that case in case you want to mount it on a tripod or anything like that. So for some it may be a better choice having it like this over the 7 that needs that case for pretty much everything. Now the biggest change on the 8 is definitely this microphone on the front. So this microphone should help with the recordings, basically with the sound recordings. And I think we should start by checking out some sample recordings that I've done with the 7 and the 8, well, the 8 and the 7, so we can figure out which one has a better microphone now that we have this additional microphone on the 8. So let's check out those recordings and I'll be right back. Alright, this is our first recording between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 7. I'm currently recording in 4K at 60 frames per second, and at this resolution we only have one level of image stabilization available on the 8 and on the 7. If I would record in 4K at 30, we have more levels of stabilization on the GoPro 8, but I will show you that in a future clip. So I'm gonna try going a bit faster so you can see which device does better this resolution for stabilization. Hopefully I don't fall. So this is how recording in 4K at 60 frames per second, oh no, looks from these two devices. For our next test I'm recording in 4K at 30 frames per second on the 7 and on the 8, and on the GoPro 8 I also have the stabilization level set to high. So like this we are losing about 10% of the field of view. But I just wanted to show you the difference if you're using this level of stabilization. On the GoPro 7 you just have one level of stabilization, you can turn that on or off. So this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second between these two cameras would look like. We are moving on to our next recording between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 7. So I'm currently recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and at this resolution the GoPro 8 gets more stabilization levels, and for this recording I have the stabilization level set to high, and with this level we basically lose about 10% of the field of view. So the road is a bit bumpy. I'm gonna try going a bit faster here so we can see which device does better. But for the next recording I will try using the maximum level of stabilization on the GoPro 8. So this is how recording looks like if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Alright, we are moving on to yet another recording in 4K at 60 frames per second between the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 7. As you can probably see, I am on the bicycle and it's also a bit windy, but at least it's super sunny. So you can see how the colors look, you can see the videos, quality, etc, etc. So under these conditions, so on the bike, the road isn't that bumpy. This is how recording from these two devices would look in 4K at 60 frames per second. And as you've seen for yourself, there is a bit of a difference if you talk in front of the cameras. The sound is a bit better, but not that much of a difference if you're actually talking behind the cameras. Behind the cameras, the sound is kind of the same on the 7 and on the 8. Now, another big difference for the 8 is the ability to choose different levels of stabilizations for different resolutions, of course. And now we even get image stabilization for 1080p at 240 frames per second. And we also get what's called boost. When you use the boost image stabilization, that's basically the max level of image stabilization, you do lose about 20 to 25% of the field of view, but the stabilization is pretty crazy. So next I think we should check out some sample recordings so you can see how the image stabilization works on the 7 versus the 8. And I have some recordings done in 4K at 30, some recordings done in 4K at 60, some 1080p at 240 frames per second, 1080p at 120 frames per second, etc. So let's check out those recordings and I'll be right back. For our next recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second on the 8 and on the 7, but for the 8 I have the stabilization level set to maximum, which is also called boost, And if you're using this mode, you basically lose about 25% of the field of view. But if you're doing something crazy, the stabilization level is definitely better. So this is how recording looks between the 8 and the 7 if you're using the maximum level of stabilization on the 8. Alright, so in order to give you a better understanding how the new IMI stabilization works on the GoPro 8, I'm gonna do a running test. I'll jump over that fence, etc. So currently I have the IMI stabilization level set on the GoPro 8 to the maximum, which is also called boost. So I'm gonna start running. We'll see if I can jump that bridge without falling or dropping the cameras. Oh no. Well, that didn't work out that good. So we'll keep running, because here the light is becoming a bit tricky. So yeah, this is how the IMI stabilization works on the 7 and on the 8. I also want to show you a quick running test recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with a regular level of IMI stabilization on both cameras. So the standard level of stabilization, the same one that we get on the GoPro 7 basically. So on the GoPro 7 we have the Hyper Smooth 1, and on the GoPro 8 we have the Hyper Smooth 2. So let's go running and see how this does. So this is how recording from these two cameras would look like if you're using the standard level of stabilization on the 8 and on the 7, and this so you don't lose the field of view, any part of the field of view, as you would if you're using a higher stabilization on the 8. There is also a pretty big change for 1080p at 240 frames per second. So the GoPro 8 gets IMI stabilization for 1080p at 240 frames per second, something that we don't have with the GoPro 7. So if you want to slow down footage, this is going to be the resolution that you want to use. So I'm just going to walk slowly here. I'm going to jump over this fence. I'll try to get close to the water there. So you're probably seeing a big difference considering that we have IMI stabilization on the GoPro 8. And let's look at the water here and see how it looks on both cameras. And this is another quick test recording in 4K at 60 frames per second, and at this resolution we basically have the same IMI stabilization on these two cameras. Well, with the 8 we get the Hyper Smooth 2, and with the 7 we get the Hyper Smooth 1. So I'm not sure how big of a difference there is, but I'll definitely check it out when I get home on the computer. So this is how recording in 4K at 60 frames per second between these two cameras would look like. If I switch to 1080p at 120 frames per second, then we have IMI stabilization on the 7 and on the 8. So if you have the 7, this is going to be the resolution that you want to use if you're trying to slow down some footage. I'm trying to go up these stairs quickly, and we'll try running this way so you can see how the stabilization does at this resolution. And I'm getting pretty tired running, so I think we're going to stop the running here. So I think this is gonna be our last recording, daytime recording between the 8 and the 7. I'm recording in 4K 30 frames per second once again, and on the GoPro 8 I have the stabilization set to high. So not the maximum level, the one below that, where we are losing about 10% of the field of view. So I'm gonna spin around, walk this way a bit. Now the sun is behind me. And I'll spin around once again and again, and let's go running for a bit so you can see how this looks on cameras. So yeah, this is how recording from these two devices would look like. And as you've seen for yourself, there is quite a bit of a difference for IMI stabilization, mostly when you're running or doing some sudden movements. The GoPro 8 does do better, mostly if you're using the boost level of IMI stabilization, which is the max level of IMI stabilization. So if you're like into running, if you do a lot of crazy things where you have to jump up and down all the time, the GoPro 8 will definitely do better for that. Not to mention that now we get that image stabilization for 1080p at 240 frames per second, and if you want to slow down some footage, that's the resolution that you're gonna be using. So very nice that we actually get image stabilization at that resolution. Now for colors, I have to say that I personally prefer the colors and the brightness of the video from the 7. Call me crazy, but I just find that the 7 does a better job. The 8 seems to have all the footage a bit too dark, at least for my taste. Of course, I could edit the footage from the 8 or from the 7 and I could make them look the same if I wanted to, but a lot of people don't actually go into color grading and so on. Alright, next we are gonna move on to some nighttime recordings, and for nighttime recordings neither camera does that great, but I feel that the GoPro 8 does a tiny bit better. So let's check out those two recordings that I've done at night and I'll be right back. And we are moving on to a low light test, because as you can probably see it's night. So I'm currently recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 7. As you can probably tell, I am walking and the stabilization is also turned on both cameras. So it is a bit windy and you're probably gonna hear a lot of traffic around me as well. So I'm gonna try going around here where it gets darker, because I wanna see how these two cameras do in the darkness, because for some people that may actually be important. So from what I'm seeing on the screens here, well, I can't really see anything, so they're definitely not doing that great in darker places. If you have some lights on the street, I think they do okay, but definitely not amazing from what I'm seeing on the screens here. So this is how a recording at night looks between the GoPro 7 and the GoPro 8. So I'm gonna pan right and left, and we'll go this way. And this is gonna be our last video test in low light, at least. So once again, I'm recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. I have the electronic image stabilization turned on, and on the GoPro 8 I actually have the image stabilization turned on to high. I could have also had it to the maximum level, which is boost. So under these conditions, walking with not that much light, this is how recording from these two action cameras looks like. So I'm gonna walk here where it's a bit darker, and honestly I can't really see anything on the screens on these two cameras, but with my own eyes I can actually see a lot. So they're not doing that great in low light. So yeah, this is how they do at night basically. And as you've seen for yourself, neither camera does that great for nighttime recordings, but realistically no action camera is known for good nighttime recordings because the sensors are just way too small. Now moving on to pictures. Picture quality kind of remains the same, but now the GoPro 8 does have somewhat warmer tones for the daytime pictures, and I think it makes those pictures look a bit better. Well, a bit more Instagram ready, I would say. Not that the GoPro 7 used to take bad pictures, but now I feel that the GoPro 8 does take somewhat better pictures during the day. Nighttime pictures, they kind of look the same. So yeah, the GoPro 8 and the GoPro 7. Now, just in case you're wondering, these two cameras basically use the exact same batteries, so you can change the battery from the 7 to the 8. However, you do get this message on the 8 saying that if you're using that particular battery, you're not going to be able to use all the features. So you're probably better off to buy batteries for the 8. But as for battery life, there is no difference. I started recording the footage for this video at 100% on both cameras, and when I was done I was at 41% on the GoPro 8 and at 40% on the GoPro 7. So really no difference for battery life in between these two. I've also noticed that the screen on the GoPro 8 is a tiny bit brighter, but just a little bit brighter, not that much of a difference. But other than that, not too much of a difference between the 8 and the 7. Personally, I would still choose the 8. Well, I have both now, but I would choose the 8 just for that better image stabilization. But I wish I would have that better image stabilization on the 7 to get the colors and the brightness from the 7, because I do prefer the footage from the 7 over the 8. Hopefully this video didn't make you more confused than you were already. Hopefully you liked it, and you can press that like button, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.